Hello, in this session we will look at corporate sustainability as well as changing business models and learning from nature. Business models and practices are essential to sustainability. Why? Because social and environmental externalities have mostly been generated in the corporate sector. Businesses have to integrate in their models intangibles like human capital and natural capital, as well as social capital and intellectual capital, not just financial and manufacturing. This is what we saw in the previous session. Business structures today are not adapted to addressing transition challenge because they focus mostly on the short term. So to have them focusing on the long term and sustainability and resilience and innovation, we would need to adapt the corporate structures or change them. So we will also look at new corporate structures like social businesses. And finally, we will also look at what nature has to teach us. Nature has been adapting and innovating for billions of years. So we could really learn a lot from it, or from her. And in this session, we will also look at biomimicry, the circular economy, as well as the sharing economy. So sustainability is really a matter of corporate survival. Some companies will make it and some won't. So let's start. Let's look at intangibles here, since they are so important for sustainability. About a century ago, if the balance sheet of a company, its book value, was pretty close to the company's actual value. And at the time, industries were basic, services were basic. Whereas today, in today's world, it's much more complicated. Services are more complex, as well as industries, and intangibles are taking a much bigger part of a company's valuation. So today's book values can be very different from company's value as measured by its market value, its stock price, market capitalization. So look at these numbers. In 1975, only 17% of the market value of a company was intangibles. 40 years later, that number went from 17% to almost 90%. This is a massive increase. So if a company doesn't take care of that intangibles, R&D, innovation, human resources, human capital, it can be quite problematic for its value. But it can actually be quite problematic for its survival. Let's look at the case of the car manufacturers. The technology of making electrical cars has existed for 40 years at least, and yet they never bothered making electrical cars. The companies didn't want to invest in that technology. They knew it, but didn't want to invest. Why? Because they didn't want to cannibalize their existing model, and they were making really too much money with replacement parts. It's a cash cow, replacement parts. Each time you have to change things in your car. So they stayed there and sat on the existing business model. But then what happened? Tesla arrived, a total outsider. And suddenly all the car manufacturers realized that they made a mistake and that they should have started producing electrical cars a long time ago. And some companies may not survive, so not taking care of that innovation, of your intangibles, can really kill you. So intangibles can be grouped in three categories. First one is innovation, discovery, like the electrical cars. Second is organizational practices, design. And the third one is human resources. And they are interlinked. If you want to be innovative, you probably have to invest in your human resources. And they also echo the 6 capitals types that we saw in accounting: human, social, natural, as well as intellectual property. So we see how those two sessions follow each other. Now, in terms of strategy and business models, because taking care of your intangibles affect the way you're doing your business. But it's very hard. Companies are aware of it, that they need to reinvent their business models, but it's very hard for them. That's what we saw with the car industry. But you have a new business model that is, a newish business model, which is the move from linear production to circular production and transformation. and that is really derived from nature, where the waste of one is becoming the food for another. That whole recycling. So you have two graphs there where that you can look at that describes the difference between linear and circular, and we'll get back to it at the end of this session when we look at nature. The second part of the session is about corporate structures and how today's corporate structures have not provided the flexibility to companies to be innovative, to look at the long term, to be sustainable. And often you see that you have reorganizations, you have mergers, acquisitions, and so there's always excitement about it. They feel like there's a new energy, that suddenly we can look at the long-term strategies, but it doesn't last. Very quickly, the short-termism, the tyranny of the short-termism comes back. It's that myopia comes back. And I don't remember who was saying that those mergers, restructuring, reorganization is just like reshuffling the deck chairs. There's nothing fundamental that is changed. To have fundamental change, we would need to have structures that would allow people's engagement, would allow to internalize social environmental externalities, move to a stakeholder model, and abandon the shareholder model, as well as integrate sustainability into governance. That's what we saw before, into the accounting. And also lengthen the horizon from short term to long term. But how do you do that? By incentivize management on the long term. So what new corporate structures have emerged recently? The first one, and maybe the most famous one in terms of label, is the social business. And that was born, it became really known with Mohamed Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize, Mohamed Yunus. And I'll give you his definition of social business. It is a non-dividend company created to solve a social problem. Like an NGO, it has a social mission. But like a business, it generates its own revenues, both to cover its costs and to produce a surplus. And while investors may recoup their investments, all further profits are reinvested into the same or into other social businesses. That's a pretty extreme definition. So you can make profit, but you cannot distribute them to investors. You have to reintegrate them in the business or in other social businesses. And a lot of people don't agree with that definition. And they say, well, okay, we agree with everything, but a social business should be able to give dividends to its investors. And actually, not only, it's if you think about it, it may even be a necessity. Because if you don't reward your investors in some ways, at least a little bit, for their investment, for taking risk, you may never find the funding that you need. So social business has become more, the way I use it is much more liberal than the Mohamed Yunus pure definition. And most people don't use Mohamed Yunus pure definition because it's really too much constraint, especially in the Western world. So I'll tell you a little bit about me, my story. I discovered social business in 2012 when I reconnected with a client of mine from Lehman Brothers who became a social entrepreneur and moved to Cambodia. At that time, I didn't know anything about it, but it resonated. I felt like intuitively, deep down, I felt like it was the only way to do business. And all businesses had to be social. And what it meant by being social, it meant more than just people. It meant taking care of all actors in that process. The company profits, the investors as well, the capitalists, people who put the money, but also the environment, clearly, but the customers and the employees. So people, the environment, and the company's shareholders and the company's founders. So the profit part. So really, I thought about this. The actors have to be aligned, and if they are not, the business will break down at some point. And it has broken down over and over again. Oh, by the way, when I say business actors, it was before the term stakeholder was known. So stakeholders, actors, it's the same thing. It's all actors in that system, the stakeholder of the system. It's a complicated word, I think, just to oppose it to shareholder, stakeholder. So all actors have to be aligned. And when I discovered that, I really wanted to make that film. And that film, I named it Social Business, A New Path for Capitalism. I didn't have the title at first. It's really while I was making that film that suddenly I was thinking, but why am I doing this? What am I trying to understand? I didn't know anything about that. I was discovering as I was making the film. And once I finished it, I sent it to all festivals around the world. And I was on the road or in the air for about a year, just screening that film and organizing discussions about it. And the interesting thing is that at that time, the question that was the most asked when I was screening that film, the question that came back over and over again was about the definition. What is a social business? People were trying to understand what it was. And finally, I've never been that interested in what it was, or really trying to define it precisely. I've always been more interested in understanding why we needed social business. And I have a really deep belief that we will stop talking about social business because at some point we will realize that it's the only sustainable way of doing business. So it's just business, because if it's not social, it's not sustainable, and at some point it breaks down. So that's my deep belief. It may not happen while I'm alive, but that's how I talk about it, and in a much more liberal way than strict definition that you will find in textbooks. So the second structure that has come up, which is it's the B Corp, for benefit corporation. And if you want to ask me I personally believe that B Corp and social businesses are the same thing. The main difference is that one is, I would say, much more liberal in its legal structure, and the other one is has a certification. Well, let me rephrase that. B Corp or certified social businesses, and they are certified by a non-profit organization called the B Lab, and the B Lab has criteria to qualify as social business, but it is a social, to qualify as a B Corp, but it is social business. It's really to address that social mission. So I'll read you the B Corp Declaration of Interdependence. We envision a global economy that uses business as a force for good. This economy is comprised of a new type of corporations, the B Corporation, which is purpose-driven and creates benefit for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. As B Corporations and leaders of this emerging economy, we believe that we must be the change we seek in the world, that all business ought to be conducted as if people and place mattered, that through their products, practices, and profits, businesses should aspire to do no harm and benefit all. To do so requires that we act with the understanding that we are each dependent upon another and thus responsible for each other and future generations. So that is the B Corp Declaration of Interdependence. It has been adopted by lots of for-profit social mission businesses, small and large, like Patagonia in the US or Natura in Brazil. And the B Lab says that B Corp certification is to sustainable business what fair trade certification is to coffee, or USDA organic certification is to milk. B Lab promotes rigorous standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. You can go on their website. It's super well done. It's super institutional. I tend to be a bit wary when I see things that are too rigid, especially that you have lots of companies that are just going to make sure that they tick the box, but their intentions are not really sincere. It's social washing. So we have seen a lot of people moving into that area. In France, La Loi Pacte also created the term Autoplays Emission, so mission-led companies, and more companies are adopting that status, and more financial institutions are adopting that status. Several fund managers have done it. So it's become it has become a true movement. Some are sincere, again, genuine, and some are not. Social washing. It's still better than nothing, isn't it? So big corp social businesses, to me, same. What about rethinking existing business structures? Because not all companies are going to just change completely. So I'll give you examples. Some companies, they're not going to redo all the structures. What they do is that they acquire social businesses or businesses with a mission, like Unilever acquiring Ben & Jerry, or like Coca-Cola acquiring Innocent. You know that drink that looks like smoothies? Super healthy. Or Danone, which was the first one to create a social business, a local social business in Bangladesh with Mohammed Yunus. So all these companies, they still, I would say, classical companies, but they are acquiring all social businesses or for mission companies. Their real intention, I don't know. It might be marketing, or it might be sincere. It's probably still better than nothing. Some others decide to go against the market and not publish their quarterly accounts or guidance. Again, like Unilever and Nestle, they decided not to do it anymore. And the analysts, well, they have to accept that. They are big enough to just say, no, I won't. And also, you have more and more business leaders which are promoting long-term sustainable goals, like the UN ones, and arguing that long-term view will create shareholder value as well as real social progress. So they encourage incentivizing managers on the long term, but you really have to go beyond just the C-suite, the CFO, CEO. This is great to have them, but you have to align your intention at every level of a company, to communication, human resources, to the most modest employee. Everybody has to be aligned in that mission. Otherwise, it's not credible. So now let's move to the last part of that session, which is what nature has to teach us. Nature's lessons, biomimicry. Have you heard of that term? Well, it's nature is full of innovation, adaptation, and we can really, and humankind has learned a lot from it. For instance, our ancestors have used the bark of trees as medicine, and this is what later we will find in things like aspirin and quinine. They have also managed to use fermentation to create bread, to create beer and wine, and more recently they have created artificial photosynthesis. If you think about solar panels, it's just the same as a leaf, or something like Velcro. Velcro is comes from weeds, burr snagging on dog's fur. So it's I didn't even know. I found that out. I found that out today. So Velcro was suggested by the way that weed burrs snag in a dog's fur. I had to look at the definition of those words, but finally you get the picture. And more companies, large and small, are using biomimicry to be more sustainable, but also more efficient and often more profitable. An example is Lufthansa. Lufthansa, they get inspired by shark skin, and they put a material, a coating that was imitating shark skin on the aircraft, and it increased the aerodynamism of the aircraft, and it managed to save fuel. So the savings were about 1% of fuel. It sounds like not a lot, but over the lifespan of an aircraft, it can add to a lot. And other companies like Qualcomm, GE, they have done the same. You name them. They all have been inspired by nature. Another iconic biomimicry project, it's the Eden project in Cornwall. It's also an example of circular design. This project, the project architect, had the ambition to turn linear consumption models into cycles, with waste used to fuel another cycle of activity, so mimicking the interdependency of ecosystems. That's really the nature of circular economy. The design of the site biomes was influenced by gossamer thin, so dragonfly wings. And it's the largest greenhouse of the world. And during the first 3 years of operation, when it opened, it made over 500 million pounds of revenues, and it completely revitalized the whole region. The whole region was it was built on a site which was an old clay mine, which was at the end of its life. I mean, look at what it looks like now. Now I discovered that place. Now I want to go and check it out. It has become a place of fertile abundance. It's beautiful, massively green. So it's a social business. It's also an NGO. They have different structures associated to that project. But it's a great example. So perhaps the greatest gift of biomimicry is that it has made us aware that the ultimate bottom line is nature. Linked to nature, we have the notion of we have circular economy. Well, if you think about nature, nature recycles, permaculture. The waste of one becomes the food of another. But that's what the circular economy is, and that's what we saw earlier as a business model. Close to that term, you have the sharing economy. This is more recent because it has been possible and it has developed thanks to technology and the internet. And it's really the notion of that what is more important is the use of a product, not the ownership of it. An example is the car. If you want to go from point A to point B, do you need to own a car? No, it might be more efficient, cheaper to join a carpool, like BlaBlaCar, for instance. And we have the same thing for holidays. If you want to go to a place, do you need to own something? A house? You can exchange. So there's a notion of co-creation in the share economy. And to go back to cars, we estimate that if everybody was using carpool, we would only need 10% of the existing cars. So it would be really good for the planet, consuming less, producing less. So the sharing economy is one way of moving toward sustainability. So we have all these models and all this technology that is available to us, and yet there's been a lot of resistance. It's taking a long time to transition, but now it's more urgent than ever because we are really in quite a dire situation. The current crisis is reminding us how our backs are against the wall, and that we really need to change our ways of doing business. We need to change our ways of consuming. Instead of being consumer, we could be users of services. And but it's been really difficult and taking a long time. And why has it been this way? There's a strong inertia because the people in place, businesses in place, they are so big and powerful. They don't want things to change. The financial system is a good example. We saw how the financial system is getting a rent out of the economy, out of the system itself. It has its own rent. It's quite amazing if you think about it. Banks create money and then they decide who gets money and they get paid on top of this. So they don't have any interest to change. But yet we need to get that moving. And we see that there is a movement. There are more and more mission-led companies being created, even the financial system. There are new products, long-term investment products. That's what we saw last session, investing for the long term. And the second reason why also things that haven't been moving more is that there has not been incentives to do it. So maybe that's when the government should take action. Maybe we could start where we are right now, education. And actually that's why I'm here, trying to have more and more people adopting that way of thinking and rejecting the financial and economic theories, the traditional ones that we have been fed, which have given no incentives to the financial system and companies to change. But we have to, so maybe we have to start changing there. So anyway, technology is a big thing, and that's what we'll see in the next session. Thank you for following all this class, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.